Hello and welcome to the afternoon session. As people flow in and out, we're going to just get started so we have an opportunity to get to know each other. So you are currently at the Symbiosis Mentors and Mentees session. We're going to learn how to create a mutually beneficial relationship. I'll introduce the panelists in a little bit when they actually appear. There are no disclosures, though, by anyone. So today we're going to talk about mentorship, and this is just a brief overview of the day. This is going to be a very productive session. You're going to walk out with a toolkit. So we're going to have an introduction. We're going to talk about why we need mentorship and how to find a mentor. And then we're going to get into what makes a good mentor, because even though, and we'll figure this out soon, even though you might be mentees, one day you'll be mentors. And so what does it take to be a good mentor? What does it take to become a good mentee? And a crucial part of a relationship, any relationship, is feedback. It helps enrich and nourish the relationship. So we're going to talk about how to have good feedback. Our panelists, some are seated right here. This is a very distinguished group of people. You'll notice they are all women. These are current These are current and former chairs of emergency medicine. These are rock stars of our field. We have Jill Baren, Jane Brice, and these guys will introduce themselves in a little bit. Deb Diercks, Cherri Hobgood, Angela Mills, Susan Promes, and Sue Stern, and your navigators for the day are Liz Goldberg and I, Neha Raukar. All right, and so we're just going to take 1 second looking out at this audience. Tell me who here are mentees? Or good, everybody raised their hand. That was the right answer. Who here are mentors? Oh, fabulous. So you're going to learn a lot today. All right. And so, we already did it. So let's go around the room, because we have a small enough audience right now, and introduce yourselves. And we're going to start with Basma. Yeah, speak up a little bit. Sorry. Fabulous.
I'm Jill Baren from Promes School of Medicine and Medicine Protocol. I'm Cherri Hobgood from Indiana University. Jane Brice from the University of North Carolina.
All right. Go on.
Why don't we have the chairs come up?
Yeah, why don't we have the chairs come up? Sit in the chairs.
Going 3 down, but
So the chairs and people are going to float in and out of this session, because concurrently there's a leadership session going on, and so we're going to have people just floating in and out, and it's going to be totally laid back, and it'll be fine. All right?
And while we just have a break, I wanted to mention that this session is AWEM sponsored. So AWEM is the Academy for Women in Academic Emergency Medicine, and we're actually the largest academy in SAEM. And if you haven't looked at joining us, we recommend that you go to the website and have a look, especially if you like today's session.
So first, why do we need a mentor? Right? You go through medical school, you enter residency, you enter your career. Why do you need a mentor? You know, we spend a lot of time, especially this past year, talking about gender equity, salary equity. We talk about how this is elusive and what can we do to get better at it. We talk about the number of women in medical school and how it's equal to the number of men. And yet when we take our lens and look forwards, we see that the number of women in academic medicine in general and emergency medicine are falling off. They don't make it to the end. They don't make it to full professor. They don't make it to associate professor at the same rates that men are making it. And so there's a lot of ideas as to why this happens, and there's a lot of theories, and there's a lot of substantiated theories. And one of them is a complete lack of mentorship for women. So this is central to academic medicine. And they've shown that women who have mentors and men who have mentors have better research productivity, academic promotion, faculty retention, and career satisfaction. So it's an important part of becoming an academic physician. Slower academic promotion rates and the fact that women are leaving academic medicine sort of highlight the fact that we need mentorship. But studies have also shown that women are not obtaining mentors at the rate that they should, and even if they have mentors, they're not keeping them. So that was the impetus behind this year's session. So how do we find a mentor? Depends what you're looking for, right? If you want windswept hair, you're going to look to Beyonce. And if you want to be taken very seriously and make an impact on society, you're going to look at RBG. But it doesn't matter who you find. You want to find somebody you like. But it's hard to go up to a complete stranger and at that, a famous person, and say, hey, can you just be my mentor? It's kind of hard to do that. So you want to be known to them. You want them to recognize you. You want them to know your name. And so in this day and age, there's ways to do that. You can retweet their posts. You can talk about their research. You can send them an email and say, hey, I'm looking at you, and I'm interested in what you're doing, and I do something similar, and here's what I think. So there's ways to sort of get into their spectrum. You also want to study the person, right? You want to make sure that your philosophies align. You want to make sure that your worldviews are aligned. And you can't force this, right? You can't make this happen. You have to watch the person, make sure that they're thoughtful. And the things you want to look for are they a good listener? They're sort of like guides, right? They haven't always experienced the same life experiences you have, but they shouldn't be there to spoon feed you answers. They should be there to challenge you, to reflect upon what you're saying, and they should help you develop your own answers. That make sense? And one thing, just because someone's older than you and has some seniority, that does not make them an automatic mentor, right? You have to make sure that they are aligned with your thoughts. So here's going to be our panelists today. We went over them. All right. So
And we had a question for our panels of chairs.
Oh, well, you got to make them all come up here.
Two of them just came
I
in.
know, right? They're like sneaking. I'm like, get up here, Dirk.
You walked in
You
perfect
know,
time.
I'm like, come on.
There you go.
So we'd like to hear from you. How did you find your mentor, and what advice do you have for our audience in terms of finding a mentor?
Do you want me to?
Sure.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, it is on. Okay, terrific. So I am going to tell a little bit of a story about how I found my mentor when I give my little talk, but I will say that it was a very serendipitous experience. It wasn't that active and planned and strategic, but later on I did that with other mentors. I looked at people around SAEM, for example, who, were doing research, and I did a lot of cold calling and cold emailing. I was not shy about that, and it's very reaffirming because every time you do it, people say yes. I've never had anybody say, I can't help you, or I can't talk to you, or I won't give you advice. People absolutely love to do that, and I love when people do that to me. So I would just encourage people to not think about it necessarily as an active thing, but or necessarily as a chance occurrence, but it can be very active. In my instance, my most influential mentor happened to have been a sort of a chance occurrence, but I'll tell that story later.
So I think it's dependent on your personality and the way that you go about finding people in your life and the way that you go about finding support. For me, almost all of my mentors have been persons who were working in the sphere in which I was either working on or interested in working on. And I cannot echo enough what Neha said just a minute ago, which is they really need to be people whose core values are similar to yours. That they have to be people, so if transparency and honesty and integrity are important to you, then those are the qualities you need to find in your mentor, because it's not going to be a successful relationship if they are not transparent, or they are a liar, or they are not, don't have integrity. It's just not ever going to work.
You know, so I took my first job because it was close to home. And there was no one who, I mean, I did cardiac research as a resident, and I walked in, and they had this cardiac database, and they looked at me and said, could you actually get the data off that? And I said, okay. So I read like a book called Data for Dummies. There was actually one that called that, and I'm like, this is how I learned my stats. And so my mentorship and my mentoring was actually obtained from going to meetings like this, where I had a mentor in how to get engaged. And luckily, I had some people who did research and were interested in the area I was. But I didn't go into it with like, this mentor is where I was. My mentor, I think I found from just networking and finding someone who we clicked. And we clicked on a lot of areas, and I trusted them to give me mentorship that wouldn't steer me wrong. So I did some cold calling. I called a vascular biologist because I thought I could really look at, you know, the impact on estrogen, on vascular permeability and stuff. And I went there and I met with him, and I was so excited. And he looks at me and goes, well, I can mentor you if you do rat tail research. And I'm like, oh. Because that's what he wanted to do. And I'm like, well, that was a fail. And I walked away and never called him again. And so I think that you just really got to find somebody that you trust to give your advice, and they may not be that mentor on topic, but they may be that person who can tell you how to navigate the landmines, and they may not be at your own shop.
So, as others have said, they've met mentors in various different ways or looked for them. I was lucky. My very first mentor was a woman physician at Highland Hospital, Christy Koenig, who kind of took me under her wing when I was a resident and really helped me kind of through the early parts of my career. And then as my career went in a different direction, it was finding those other individuals that would help me. And I would say people, I think as you heard Dr. Brice say, you know, you want to find people that you respect and kind of meet the same values than you do, but I also say go outside your comfort zone. You don't want somebody that's just like you. You need someone to complement things that maybe you're not very strong in, so look for that too. I think it's important.
We also just wanted to recommend that people in the audience that have questions speak up and ask questions. This is meant to be interactive.
Okay, we're good?
Yep, I had a question.
Oh.
Well, I wouldn't say that someone like necessarily stole my idea, but I would say that, you know, I think that a lot of things that happen in a mentorship relationship, a lot of that can be around brainstorming about what good projects should be happening and how do we execute those projects. And, you know, really, particularly in mentorship that is focused on the development of your content expertise, there is a lot of work that is really actually expected from the mentee, that there's, you know, you will do work for your mentor in order to move a project along. And that is, some of that is the quid pro quo around that. You know, if you feel like that someone is being, you know, dishonest, I think, about your work or your work product, then, you know, again, I think that having a lot of clarity, and I'll talk about this in my talk about, you know, what is the structure of your relationship and what is your personal developmental plan, and have you guys hammered out, you know, again, those same types of things that we'll talk about for other, you know, really structured relationships. Like, do you have like, if we're going to write a paper on this, what's the author order, and and how are we going to do this, and how is this body of work going to roll out, and who's going to be responsible for what? Those are absolutely conversations that you can and should have with your mentor, and they're important conversations, not only for you to facilitate the relationship, but also to have clarity of expectations, so that it doesn't get hurt. But it doesn't always work out.
I mean, I think there's go ahead. I think there's a generational difference in what mentorship is, and a lot of the challenges are, when we started out, a mentor was someone who just put their last name on the paper and then took credit for everything you did, even though you did all the work. Right? When we've moved, it's true. I don't know how to say it. That used to be the old department chair language, right? I'm going to put my name on everything, and yay, it's all my work, and you did everything, and I didn't really talk to you about it.
I wasn't in that department.
And now we've gone to mentorship contracts, where it's much more of a formal environment, where there's much more expectations between the mentee and the mentor. And so I think we've transitioned away a little bit, where it's more of a formal relationship in a lot of times. And that kind of formal relationship does set boundaries. Right. And it sets expectations both ways. So no one leaves that interaction feeling like they were taken advantage of. But I think that when you hear about some of these bad mentor-mentee relationships, a lot of them are built on 1950s kind of medicine, and which pretty bad sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Sorry for being late, but so the only other thing that I would add to that, and maybe this was said before I got here, is that sometimes these issues come up more when there's been the mentor-mentee relationship has progressed, and the mentee is now really trying to become more senior and independent. And it's a challenge for the mentor sometimes, but it's important that they recognize that part of that is giving the mentee the opportunity to be independent, and that's sometimes where that tension occurs. A lot of times that is in the realm of research, but it certainly can happen in any mentor-mentee relationship. So I think that can be a challenge for mentors and mentees to get over, is that relationship will change a little bit, and they have to adapt it.
I just want to cut in for 1 sec. We'll talk about this a little bit later, or we'll mention it, but it's totally appropriate when you start this mentorship relationship to, at least in your mind, and maybe you say it out loud, to have an expiration date, because sometimes you will outgrow your mentor, and sometimes it's just time to move on. And so in your mind, it's okay to have sort of this expiration date, like milk. So making the ask. So you can't just go up to somebody and say, hey, can you be my mentor? Although that's how I got my first ever mentor. I just said, I think you're amazing, and I'm not sure, but I want to hang out with you. And she said, what you're asking is you want me to be your mentor. And I'm like, yeah, that's good too. And so that's how I got my first mentor. So it's a big ask. So for the first so what you really want is a meeting, so you can gauge who this person is, and you can figure out who they are. Something informal, maybe over coffee. And so the goal of today, you guys don't know this yet, but what's going to happen today is we're going to, as you guys look for your mentors, we have a panel of amazing people who know everybody in the field. And so we're going to have little breakout sessions. Liz?
So we're going to have one chair go to each table, and the idea is that we want you to approach at least one or two people during this conference. And not necessarily these people, but we want you to rehearse your elevator pitch, and we want the chairs to give some input on what you're doing and who else is doing something similar in the field, and who it might be worthwhile to approach during the conference, and then also maybe some feedback on your pitch and what else needs to be in there. So we'll talk about that a little further soon.
And so it's said that if you can't summarize what you do in under a minute, or what you're about in under a minute, you have no idea what you're trying to do. And so I've been told this a million times, that you have to be able to summarize what you do in under a minute, because that's about the time it takes to go from ground zero to the top of the building in an elevator. That's why it's called an elevator pitch. And so you're going to practice your elevator pitches, all right? So you're going to make the ask. And then after you have had coffee, you're going to evaluate the relationship. Do you want to spend more time with this person? Think of this is very similar to what? Dating, right? So you want to evaluate the relationship. Do they encourage you, or do they just take over the conversation and sort of run you over? Did you leave feeling better about yourself? Was there a connection? And the key thing is, unlike dating, you have to follow up. Follow up almost immediately. Thank them for their time. Tell them that you want to develop this relationship. Mention how often you'd like to meet if you want them to be your mentor. Frame the mentorship as something you'd like them to consider. You can't just tell them. You have to ask them, and take out the sense of obligation. Thoughts? All right. So evolve. You want to make sure your mentor and you can evolve together, but you also want to make sure that they challenge you. So be kind. But the whole premise of a mentor-mentee relationship is kindness, and they're there to support you, just like you're there to support them. And so people get busy, people have deadlines. If the mentor cancels, it's okay. They'll just reschedule. A great mentor will guide you, will help you reach your goals, but will challenge you and push you for more than what you might be ready for. So the next question for our panel is, when you met the person that you wanted to be your mentor, how did you ask them? How did it happen?
I'm sure I drank a beer with mine and said, hey, you know, we're going through the same stuff. Should we do research together? And that was probably it. I mean, I think it's really kind of just, a lot of times happens naturally with different people, you know. The person I call my mentor was probably was also my sponsor, was also my coach, and is now one of my best friends. And so I think that it was just a natural kind of relationship, and we didn't formalize it, and it just kind of worked.
I know this sounds very formal, and it's frightening me just a little bit. Because I have had many mentoring relationships in my career and continue to develop them as I find new skills that I need or new areas of development. And they've all been very loose relationships where I didn't set up a number of times to meet, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Or make it very formal. And
that's sort of key, right? So sometimes it just evolves organically. And sometimes if you're making the cold call, the cold ask, so mine is what I'm talking about is the cold call. I want to meet you, I want to be in your sphere. How do I do it?
Yeah, I'm, I guess, a lot more like Jane in that regard. But I will say that I'm probably one of the people that, you know, maybe he was a mentor, maybe he was a coach. He certainly was a sponsor. But he was the former dean of the School of Medicine, and Jane knows him well as well at UNC. And so he had, you know, for whatever reason, I mean, you know, he kind of picked me. He said, I'm choosing, you know, a certain number of people that I'm going to meet with regularly, and I want you to be one of those people. I think you have high potential, and, you know, I want you to start meeting with me. And so I was like, okay, and we did, and it developed into a very fruitful relationship that was honestly very meaningful for me. We addressed a lot of tough issues that I think that were, you know, organizational issues. We talked a lot about organizational psychology, how do you interact within a matrix organization. I mean, he was really helpful in, you know, working with me in the Center for Creative Leadership and getting a 360 evaluation done, and we debriefed on all that. And so, I mean, it was really, you know, a very powerful relationship that was formative for me in terms of my development. But in that sense, he kind of picked me, and I said, okay. But then again, I was willing also to do the work. And so that there is, in any kind of relationship like that, there is work that has to be done, whether it's a reflection on your leadership style and your development in that space, or writing a manuscript or paper, et cetera. Those kinds of things are very are different types of relationships. But the mentee does have a need to actually carry some of that water and have a tremendous amount of responsibility in that space. So, you know, I felt lucky to be picked by him, and that relationship actually bore a lot of fruit.
Mine was much more formalized through an actual career track, and that was fellowship training. And so while there were many faculty that had input into both my clinical fellowship training as well as my research accomplishments, this person, my most significant mentor, had lots of input into my growth in academic medicine in a holistic sense. So everything from, you know, charting that course to interviewing for the job, putting together my materials, positioning myself in the national community, introducing me at meetings to various other notable people in the field, just sort of all the parts of, you know, what you have to do to set out a course for an academic pathway. So it was formalized in that sense. Many people have fellowship directors that don't necessarily end up as their mentors, but in my case, that was the way it played out.
So I would have to say the mentors that have been in my life, some have just been because of happenstance. We were in situations, we connected and worked well together. But there's also been situations where I've sat down with people and asked them, will you help me, will you mentor me? And I think the one that shines for me is working with a woman who's PhD in education, because I did educational research. You know, I understood the questions, I knew what I wanted to ask, but I needed help with methodology or maybe analysis of some data. And we worked together well in that regard, and we were mutually beneficial to each other ultimately in our career. But at first I went to her to ask for help, and you know, she was grateful that I even reached out to her, because she had said, you know, gee, clinicians don't usually come talk to me. You know, like usually I'm working with my colleagues who are PhDs. So don't be afraid to ask, because you'll be surprised. Almost always people will say yes, or if they don't say yes, they usually will help you find someone to fill that need. At least that's been my experience. I don't know if the rest of you would agree with that, but I think it takes a little bit on our part, right, to go ask. You know, once you get up the nerve to do that, think about your elevator pitch, you know, buy them a cup of coffee. Usually they'll probably pay for it for you, or a drink, whatever it is, but offer. And I think people in our, you know, field, that's what people do. They want to help one another. So
we're going to talk a moment about the work of being a mentee. And there is work, just as Jill said, you want to come prepared to your sessions. And I wanted to give you a sample agenda for what you might bring to one of your mentorship meetings. And most of you in the room, I think all of you in the room, are in academic emergency medicine. So you will be doing some, you have an educational mission, you probably do some research or writing. You need to do some teaching. And you also need to provide feedback to your mentor, and they need to provide feedback to you. And so this is just one example that I've used from my, I also did a research fellowship, so from my fellowship sessions, we would often start talking about our research, going through every single one of the projects to make sure that I was hitting the timeline that I wanted to hit. We talked about grants and grantsmanship, manuscripts that were in process, and then often moved into service. How is clinical work going? What kind of peer review opportunities are you doing? Are you doing too much? Are you doing too little? And then also about teaching. What kind of presentations do you have coming up? What do you need to improve your teaching? And even if you just bring this one sample agenda to your mentorship sessions with your mentor, you will look more prepared. You will actually leave that session with a product. Your mentor will appreciate that there is some type of agenda that you have thought about beforehand, and you can make sure that you're staying on course with your various projects and with your promotion timeline.
So when you approach the mentor, when you've solidified your relationship, you have to give it a chance. So commit for a little bit of time and just try to follow their teachings, follow their advice, and try to embrace the relationship. But like I said, even good things sometimes end, and sometimes there's an expiration date, and that's okay. All right.
So we're going to do our first breakout session, and we would really appreciate if the chairs could disperse themselves to the various tables. And what we're going to do is, in 1 minute, everyone at the table is going to have a chance to give their elevator pitch, which will be who you are, what you're doing now, and where you want to go. And then the chairs can offer some feedback about who might be a good mentor to you, and some feedback on your elevator pitches.